Now, though, Adam has been taking a look at the sequel to one of the most famous documentaries of all time.
11 years ago, a film came out which changed the way many people thought about climate change. The film was called An Inconvenient Truth.
If you look at the 10 hottest years ever measured, they've all occurred in the last 14 years.
This film laid bare many of the scientific realities of global warming. But it wasn't presented by a scientist. Instead, it followed US politician Al Gore. The film made a big splash with critics. It won 2 Oscars, including one for Best Documentary Feature. And Al Gore received the Nobel Peace Prize for his work on communicating climate science. But according to science historian Naomi Oreskes, the film also had a huge impact on audiences.
An Inconvenient Truth was seen by millions of Americans, and it was a very powerful film. It was beautifully made, very well produced, and very thoughtful. And opinion polls showed that people who went to see An Inconvenient Truth felt that they understood the issue better and were motivated to do something about it after seeing the film.
A lot has changed in the decades since An Inconvenient Truth, both in the climate and our society. Emissions have increased, the world has continued to warm, renewables have become cheaper. In Paris, the world agreed to halt global warming, and a couple of months ago, Donald Trump decided to pull the United States out of this agreement. To explore this changed world, Al Gore is releasing a follow-up to his 2006 film.
It is wrong to pollute this earth. It is right to give hope to the future generation.
This is An Inconvenient Sequel, Truth to Power. To veteran climate scientist Michael Mann, this film is more than an update to its predecessor.
This is much more about the larger public battle and the urgency that is apparent in comparing what we're seeing today in terms of climate change impacts with what we were seeing just 10 years ago when Gore did An Inconvenient Truth.
Both films are presented by Al Gore. And for many, Gore has become the figurehead of climate change. Although Michael reckons he's done an admirable job communicating climate science, this job has come with its pitfalls.
He's perhaps the most vilified public figure when it comes to the communication of climate change, and I should know.
Michael should know because skeptical politicians and members of the public have aggressively attacked his prominent climate research. But the attacks aimed at Al Gore have been even more extreme. Michael tells me that critics have targeted everything from Gore's personal life to his weight. Naomi reckons the reason he's so vilified is precisely because he's so successful in communicating climate change. But his political background may also limit his success.
So obviously a politician who's associated with a political party, a particular set of ideological positions, is unlikely to be effective speaking to people on the other side of the aisle. And so in that respect, I don't really expect that a lot of hardcore conservatives will go see Al Gore's new film or be persuaded by it.
Gore's political background, he's a Democrat and former vice president, could be more than a barrier to certain audiences. Michael feels that it may actually have had negative consequences for discussions about climate change.
By becoming a prominent spokesperson for the climate issue, I think that Gore played into the hands of sort of climate change deniers. It allowed them to sort of create a wedge. It allowed them to say, hey, look, just as we had told you all along, this issue is entirely about politics. And look, who's the figurehead? It's Al Gore, this failed politician, as they would call him. I think it's difficult to fault Al Gore for that, but the fact is that they were able to exploit the fact that he's a partisan political figure to great effect.
There certainly is a deep divide on climate change in American politics. A 2015 study published in Politics and Policy compared the views of conservative parties in 9 countries around the world. It found that of all the parties, only the Republican Party in the US denied climate change. Skeptics may have exploited Al Gore's political career to strengthen this divide.
Maybe it would have been better from the get-go if scientists had done a better job of explaining it, but they didn't. And so that's one of the reasons that Al Gore got involved early on.
The effects of having a politician as a spokesperson for science are complex. But Naomi and Michael both agree that the solution isn't for Al Gore to stop making films. Instead, they think it's crucial that as many people as possible, from as many fields as possible, communicate climate change.
So this problem begins as a scientific question, but it doesn't end there. In fact, it ultimately isn't a scientific question. It's ultimately a political, social, and economic question because of the profound impacts that climate change will have on all of us. So it's absolutely essential, in my mind, that other people become involved as spokespeople, politicians, business leaders, even celebrities.
There's no one magic bullet. We need all of these people and institutions and voices out there because we are talking about the greatest challenge that we've ever faced as a civilization.
That was Michael Mann, who's based at Penn State University. We also heard from Naomi Oreskes, who's based at Harvard. An Inconvenient Sequel, Truth to Power, comes out on 28th of July in America and 18th of August in the UK. Some cinemas are also broadcasting a live conversation with Al Gore before screenings of the film on Friday the 11th of August. Check out Michael's review over at nature.com/books and arts.
The news.
Good evening. This is Sandy Shallis with Environmental Coffee House, and tonight we're gonna talk about abrupt climate change, and we're going to talk about the lawsuit by the kids that are suing Trump, and we're going to talk about tornadoes, and we're going to talk about my own experience, and I'm going to talk about something I've been thinking about lately that is, since the other day, that actually was like an epiphany on my mind. And it was like, well, if those kids can sue, why can't I? For the tornado that just went through my yard. Why can't I sue on behalf of my friends, my neighbors, and where I live? So it's really been a thought on my mind, not for money, but to think about what we could do with this little grassroots effort to say that this is not normal. What happened in New York State, what happened where I live is Angelica, New York, and we had a tornado. And a lot of people are probably, already know. I've talked about it ad nauseum, so it's just something that, oops, I got to make this low. Anyway, it's kind of crazy. So share it if you want. I'm glad my friends are joining. I can see people that are joining. Of course, I'm on this Be Live, and I'm going to start with an article. Of course, I always start with reading things, and this is from one I really like, and it's robertscribbler.com. And I like this Robert Scribbler. I'm sorry I'm moving around a lot. I kind of hurt from all the work I'm doing at the house, being that my husband has come home and I'm a nurse and I'm a cleaner and I'm doing everything and I am hurting. But I'm going to say hello to my friends, Marcia and Kim, and I can see people who joined over there on a different screen. But I really think this is a really good topic, and I'm going to start with this article because I really feel like, why can't I get an environmental lawyer and sue for the destruction in my backyard that's caused by climate change because we don't get freaking tornadoes, and bring this to the public attention and wake them up that are just sitting back and saying, oh, it's okay that Erie County Fairgrounds was destroyed by a tornado. It's okay that they don't even know about my house. I wasn't even home. That an Amish sawmill was destroyed by tornadoes. That we have 9 tornadoes in this county every, maybe in 35 years. So I'm going to start with this. And this is a good article. And hi, Marcia. So 100 fossil fuel companies responsible for 71% of carbon emissions since 1988. And they're being sued for it. That is where I got some of my idea tonight. But this is something that's been going on for a couple of days. According to research from, and excuse me, my hair is driving me nuts for some reason. According to research from the Carbon Disclosure Project since 1988, 100 fossil fuel producers have been responsible for 635 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions. This total represents 71% of human carbon emissions that have occurred over the past 29 years. Companies involved in this massive carbon emission included such giants as ExxonMobil, Shell, BHP Billiton, and Gazprom. The report also found that these 100 companies were responsible for fully 52% of all emissions since the Industrial Revolution began in 1751. So no wonder why freak shit's happening like tornadoes in my neighborhood. It's really actually the fossil fuel industry's fault. And we should have been off fossil fuels 30 years ago. And I knew this then. When Jacques Cousteau was doing the television show and I would watch and he would tell tell people that we had to stop what we were doing back then, and we didn't. So report authors went on to point out that this relatively small group of companies is likely to have an outsized influence on responses to climate change. Hopefully adding that positive action by such corporations could produce significant positive change. However, historically, such companies have tended to fight against global climate treaties, misinform the public, and on the dangers related to human-caused climate change, and work to delay responses to climate change within their host nations. Due to this past bad economic actor behavior, combined with rising climate change-related damage, these corporations are also exposed to what may well be a historic and unprecedented corporate liability. And you know what? I'm going to find somebody to work with. It's not like I don't have enough to do. And I'm not looking for financial gain. But I wonder if there is somebody out there that wants to work with me because of what happened in my yard, decimated, old growth trees. We moved here thinking there's no tornadoes, it's safe, and my yard's decimated. And the videos I put up, so they're up there. But it's just led me to think about all this. If those kids could all sue for not having a future because of climate change, well, why can't I get something like this together, right? And get a class action or get some kind of lawsuit going for the tornadoes in our state that are directly caused by actions that these companies did 20 and 30 years ago that are causing the abrupt climate change we're seeing now. That's touched me. That's touching millions. And we're going to go on to that. So if you were born in 2015, the estimate for your lifetime lost wealth from climate change, according to this organization, DEMOS, and I went and looked at it, pretty interesting, they had some research on there, is between $581,000 and $764,000. I don't know if you see that fly. I had a cluster fly problem, outbreak. Those we could live without. And I'm going to get it. Okay, so with 100 companies responsible for 50% of that loss, it's pretty obvious that liability will become a more and more serious impact as climate harms ramp up throughout the coming decades. Hi, Kat. A far-reaching liability that could well include various harms related to climate change coming from such diverse dangers as sea level rise and loss of water and food security, loss of inhabitability due to heat, and damage to valuable national resources like forests, glaciers, and reefs. And haven't we been talking about these? What has environmental coffee house been doing but showing all of this stuff happening? But when it touches me, when it touches people I know, it just makes it all the more serious. And I know, Kim, you said you had a tornado in your Minnesota hometown last night. I don't know about Minnesota and the regularities of tornadoes, but it would probably be something good to research, right? So already a number of lawsuits are testing the legal waters in this regard. For example, in California this week, let's see, Imperial Beach, San Mateo, and Marin counties are filing lawsuits, okay, to get some of the world's largest fossil fuel producers to pay for sea level rise related to damages. And if Imperial Beach and the two counties prevail, large corporations like Chevron, ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips, BP, and Royal Dutch Shell could be liable for billions of dollars in mitigation costs and punitive damages in coming decades, even as direct damages from climate change ramp up. Okay? So, according to the San Diego Tribune, attorneys for the plaintiffs said they modeled their legal tactics after past efforts to hold accountable cigarette businesses and makers of, the cancer-causing agents and gas and chemical companies that used methyl tertiary butyl ether, a gasoline additive that has contaminated groundwater across the country. And though not all liability-related lawsuits against major tobacco and chemical companies were successful, those that stuck resulted in major awards, even as the lawsuits themselves produced a very harmful public relations impact. Okay, so we're going to talk about this for a minute. So that's a financial thing of suing these companies. They don't want to be sued. But I need some scientific evidence, which we have to work on. I need a scientist. I don't have a James Hansen. Maybe Dr. Guy would work with me. Maybe Paul Beckwith would work with me. Why the hell are we having tornadoes in Western New York? Why the hell is my property decimated? Why are all my old growth trees ruined? So here I'm going to read to you actually what a tornado is. Let's read the definition of a tornado. Tornadoes are formed by a combination of atmospheric instability and wind shear. Instability occurs when warm, moist air is wedged under drier, cooler air aloft. This warm air rises, causing the intense updrafts and downdrafts seen in strong thunderstorms, the incubators of tornadoes. Wind shear refers to changes in wind direction and speed at different elevations in the atmosphere. The combination of instability and wind shear forms the rotating column of air that we associate with the tornado. So, can it be that the greenhouse gases that have been farted out into our environment for the last how many years? We read from the 1700s, the industrial era. But most notably, the last 40 and 50 years, really, could that be what is causing these things locally? We see a million articles about stuff happening all over the world. And my God, I watched Paul's latest video, Paul Beckwith, and he's talking about the mass animal deaths all over the world. Mass animal deaths. I can't even watch without getting emotional. I can't even stand it. But I'm thinking that at least maybe I can wake up my little part of the world here and tell these people that this is not normal. This is climate change, and this was abrupt climate change. This was not expected. Who in the hell ever expects a tornado? My husband and I were in the hospital laughing about it. And yep, Steve, we ain't seen nothing yet. That's what Steve says. We ain't seen nothing yet. But I am looking. And if anybody knows somebody that might want to work with me, an environmental attorney that may want to say, hey, listen, we're going to do some wake-up calls. Okay? We're going to do some wake-up calls. See, even Joanne thinks it's a great idea. I do too. I've developed it over the last few days, reading a lot of other things when I have time. I don't really have time right now. I don't. I don't. But I will do this. I think I'm crazy enough to do it, or at least make a stink enough about it. You know, my backyard, you know, my acreage is getting worked on. My brother-in-law, my family. But what if I didn't have any of that to help us? What if I didn't have that? You know, I've already told you that the insurance companies don't give a shit. They don't pay for any property damage. They don't consider a tree something that is valuable. They don't consider trees to be compensatory items in a lawsuit against, an insurance company claim. Okay. They don't care. They don't care. Okay. Mother Nature, right? So then, I do want to talk a little bit about the trial date. There was an article with Inside Climate News. Now, I really don't know exactly what is going on with this, but a federal judge had set a trial for the landmark lawsuit brought about by 21 children and young adults over the U.S. government's alleged failure to rein in fossil fuel development and address climate change. Well, I want to do the same thing, but maybe with a different population. My Amish neighbor's sawmill was decimated, ruined. That's what the news showed. They didn't show my house. I wasn't home to make a stink. I wasn't home. I was in the hospital with a husband that had a motorcycle accident who lived. But I wasn't home to make a stink, but I'm making a stink now. I called the town and they were useless, really, basically. So this lawsuit with the kids, the trial will start February 5th, 2018. Now, I hope that's still the same. That's in Eugene, Oregon. It was filed in 2015. Well, what else do I have to do? I'm going to die anyway, so I might as well wait for a lawsuit that might actually wake up people. An abrupt climate change lawsuit. Because I'll tell you what, I don't know what the hell is waking up the masses. The guy from the town was taking the trees down off the road, and I made him walk into my property. I made him walk into my property so he could see just what happened. His eyes were wide open. I don't think they knew the extent. It's like the freaking thing went and sat on my property, okay? So I know you're all here for me. I love you all. I'm okay. I know I did some whiny live streams on my own page, but I'm okay. I'm strong. I got a great family. And you know what? It's not about me. It is not about me, okay? This is about my Amish neighbors. This is about the Erie County Fairgrounds. This is about what the heck is causing these tornadoes. I read to you the description. We never used to get these kind of, what were we known for in Western New York? Buffalo. Snow, okay? Snow. That's what we're known for. Are we even known for snow anymore? I don't even know. I really don't, because we sure as shit don't get the snow we used to get when I moved to Western New York. So I found this other article. I find reading articles is good, and it helps because a lot of times I forget things, and it's difficult. Let's just see what a couple of people are saying while I watch these stupid cluster flies fly around this. Kat says, yeah, a tree is a loss of life. And that loss of life devastated me. But it's not right. And the fossil fuel industry, in my opinion, is directly related to the weather that we are having. Of course, it's going on all over the world. Here's an article called, it was in Culture and Politics, and I thought it was interesting. Climate Change, Truth, Deception, and Denial. The guy's name is Daniel Margrain. The 2015 National Security Strategy sets out the Tier 1 threats faced by the UK. These are, I'm trying to get this comfortable for me, but these are international terrorism, cybercrime, and climate change. You see, these flies are driving me nuts. They're becoming more frequent and unpredictable. 9 days before the world's largest populated city, Shanghai, experienced its hottest day in recorded history, the planet's biggest iceberg, Larsen C, broke away from the Antarctic ice shelf. Well, we all know about this. This followed the collapse of more northerly Larsen A ice shelf in 1995 and Larsen B in 2002. Who's been following this? I don't know if I was following this in 1995, but I sure as hell started in 2002, knew what was going on. Climate change is likely to be contributing to the altering of wind patterns and weather throughout the world. With temperatures in the Arctic rising at twice the rate of the planet as a whole, the sea ice area is already below what would have been a yearly low in the 1980s, with 2 months still left in the melt season. The comparison highlighted in there's a graphic here, but I'm going to tell you, there's no way you're going to be able to, well, maybe you can. There's a graphic. Can you see it? Well, the graphic, it was showing the clear long-term decline of Arctic ice fueled by global rise in heat-trapping greenhouse gases. The dramatic shrinkage of sea ice over the past few decades is driving major changes, from the loss of crucial Arctic habitat to the potential influences of weather patterns around the world. And you know I talk about this because I am upset and obsessed, and I wanted to go to Greenland. I want to go to sea. But now things are postponed. Things are a lot different right now. They really are. Kim says she was following Monsanto in 1995. Very cool, Kim. Okay, let's go back to this because I think it's a pretty good one. So, Arctic sea ice reflects incoming solar rays back to space, helping to regulate the planet's temperature. But as human activities have released more and more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, the ensuing warming has caused ice to melt. That melt means more of the ocean is open and absorbs solar energy, raising temperatures more and driving melt in a vicious cycle. The potential consequences are, at some point, possibly rapidly, on a time scale of years and decades, and we've been hearing this. Raised sea levels could submerge areas that are now land, wiping out whole states from Bangladesh to the Netherlands and destroying major world cities, including New York and London. And those people down there, if they don't wake up, they better not come up here, because they will. That's what'll happen. Shit's going to hit the fan, and they're going to they're going to be climate refugees, basically. The rich ones will be able to buy the property up here. I'm going to have to surround my property with a 10-foot fence a la Donald Trump. Oh my gosh. Yes, Trevor said lots of forest fires in British Columbia and a lot more than average. Absolutely. Been reading about that. The ridiculous heat in China. Animals dying from it. Camels are dying. They're dying from the heat. They're used to heat. Boy. So the poor nations of the developing world are particularly vulnerable. These are places where millions live on the edge, directly impacted by climate change, dealing with the effects from cyclones, and droughts to erosion and floods. Tuvalu, near Fiji, and other island nations, for example, are concerned that rising sea levels will wipe out their whole country right off the map. The concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, the most important, which is carbon dioxide, is the cause of global warming, which leads to the kind of destruction outlined. The gases act as a blanket trapping the sun's heat, and I tell you, I'm going to sue the living shit out of the fossil fuel industry if I get a good environmental lawyer that believes in me and a scientist that will work with me. I don't think I'm nuts. I think I need to do something. The gases act as that blanket, and the main source of the extra carbon dioxide is the burning of fossil fuels such as coal, oil, gas in power stations and in internal combustion engines, and we could have had different things 30 years ago. We could have had it. The fossil fuel industry bought off patents. God knows what they did. They probably offed people. I don't know if that investigation's been done. And I don't know if I'm the person to do it. Deforestation, which accounts for more than 10% of the global carbon dioxide emission, also plays a role in driving climate change. Dense tropical forests are critical to keeping climate stable, and because they suck up large amounts of human carbon pollution from the atmosphere, storing it in tree leaves, trunks, leaves, and roots and soil. I wonder, besides the rocky landscape that my property is, why were these tornadoes, this tornado that dropped on my property, able to take up 10 to 12 foot base trees on my property? Why? So the greenhouse gases, there's according to a new study, a chunk of the world's forests the size of Mississippi was decimated in 2015 because of wildfire and logging and expanding palm oil plantations. We know this, but does the common person know any of this? Believe me, when I was at that hospital with my husband, I talked to everyone. The clerks in the cafeteria. I gave out the environmental coffee house card everywhere, talking about everything I could possibly talk about with people that looked at me and said, wow, I didn't know that. Wow, I'm not registered to vote. Wow, I'm 32. I have 4 kids by 3 different guys. I said, you need to get involved in politics. Do you think those 4 kids deserve anything? Do you think maybe a mom that understands what's going on? She's a beautiful girl, though. I did like her. We both liked her. We both talked to her quite a bit. So about 49 million acres of forest disappeared worldwide in 2015, mainly in North America and the tropics, putting the year's global deforestation level at its second highest point since data gathering began in 2001. In all, the globe lost 47% more forested land in 2015 than it did 16 years ago. Across from me is very flat land. I don't know if 20 years ago it was deforested and not regrown. Something for me to research, huh? That's possibly why part of this happened. We don't know, but I do have a little quick one I'm going to tell you after this about somebody that experienced it right outside of my house firsthand, which I didn't know about till today. So we have so we talked about this, the greenhouse gases, particularly carbon dioxide. It's all been over the last few decades, like I said. Beyond question, the general effect of heating up a system like the Earth's climate will be an increase in extreme weather events of the kind witnessed in recent months in countries like Spain, Iran, Pakistan, and Western New York. Tornadoes. The consequences of global warming are already evident. The science informs us that even if all greenhouse gas emissions were halted tomorrow, global temperatures are likely to rise by another 0.5 degree Celsius, and sea levels could be 2 or 3 times as great as the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC bullshit artists, have predicted by 2100. You think that they don't get something from the fossil fuel industry? You're crazy. Okay. Humans, nobody is not susceptible to greed. Even me. But I've worked on it, and I'm not like that. And I don't go and buy bullshit anymore. The only thing that comes that I buy that I hate to say in a truck is cat food and cat litter because it's too heavy for me to carry. My UPS guy carries it in. And I do feel bad about it. But I buy everything locally other than that. So many people don't realize that we are committed right now to a significant amount of global warming and sea level rise because of the greenhouse gases we've already put into the atmosphere. A paper from 2008 showed that climate change is largely irreversible for 1,000 years after emissions stop. And you wonder why maybe I just don't want to do this? I do! Floods and water quality problems are likely to be amplified by climate change in most regions of the U.S., which we see. For example, while major incidences involving storms, heat waves, like it's 105 in Richmond, Virginia, where my friend lives, droughts, floods, and hurricanes across the planet, with all the human and social consequences that bring, will be among the major challenges facing us as humanity, as human beings. But far from halting all carbon dioxide emissions, the world's major states and corporations are pumping out ever increasing amounts. You know, I couldn't have wrote this article any better, with little meaningful sign that global warming will not exceed 2 degrees Celsius, which is 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit above pre-industrial levels, the primary goal of the Paris Climate Agreement that our moron 45 is pulling us out of. President Moron. This is a direct correlation between industrialization, what the Western world calls development, and carbon emissions. All this growth. It's like, I'm driving around near the hospital the other day, and I see beautiful farmland, and what do I see? All kinds of condos, and strip malls and condos being built there. Who are they for? Why can't things just be left? Why can't we just fix what we have? I wanted to do a live stream from one of those condo places. It was just awful. I mean, why can't people buy a house in a regular neighborhood? Stop having kids, then we won't have to worry about this. 75% of the historical carbon emissions have been produced by only 20% of the world's population. United States, China, Europe. The geographical irony to this is that the effects of climate change are felt overwhelmingly in the developing world and parts of the world that are least responsible for creating the crisis. Sub-Saharan Africa. 70 to 80% of the effects of climate change are being felt in the developing world. So there is an inverse relationship between cause and effect. Continued global warming will at some point have large-scale, relatively sudden, and unpredicted, right? Just like this stupid tornado on global rainfall, wind, and temperature, on the related ocean water and heat circulation patterns. The details of these shifts are inherently unpredictable, but that they will occur with dramatic impact on global and local climate, agriculture, and much else, we already know it. Changing climate will also see shifts in the global distribution of disease-carrying insects, with potentially huge impacts on human health. And I've got a few of those goddamn things right in this room, and I've been squishing them with my fingers because they're cluster flies. I don't know where the hell they came from. The house is closed off. I really don't. I think it was a bunch of flowers I had in the house, and now I have like these stupid cluster flies. And usually my cats run around getting them, but I have one little kitten that's terrorizing the rest of my cats, and nobody wants to do anything. Let's see. So we said that, and huge impacts on human health. The consequences of all these effects could be catastrophic, causing untold misery and immense social upheaval, with the threat to the future viability of human possibility on the planet, which is a real possibility. First, they're going to take health insurance away, and half of us are going to die in the United States from that. Okay? So the realities and potential consequences posed by runaway climate change and the science underpinning it is clear. And yet the translation of the science into affirmative action, the reduction of carbon dioxide emissions by 60% by 2050, if we're alive by then, required to combat it, is not happening. The international framework by which countries are legally bound to cut CO2 emissions is the Kyoto Protocol. I talked about that, which came into effect in February 2005. By November 2009, 187 states had signed and ratified the protocol. Its centerpiece was the general commitment by signatories to cut carbon dioxide emissions by 5.2% from their 1990 levels by 2012. Let me ask you guys a question. If you had access to more things than just a Prius, if you had access to battery-powered pickup trucks and lawnmowers that would do a place like mine, and more solar and more wind and all that, wouldn't you pick that over a fossil fuel piece of crap? I would. But there isn't the choice like we want. Other countries are going towards it. 2040, they're going to ban all gasoline in Germany. While by 2040, we're going to be choking so bad that we're going to be just locking ourselves into, if we're lucky to have air conditioning, or sitting in a car with air conditioning because we can't freaking breathe. A major problem is that the state responsible for more carbon dioxide emissions than any other, the arrogant United States, where I happen to live, with a quarter of all global emissions, refused to sign the Kyoto Agreement or any other international agreement on climate change, and that was not even 45. Remember who that was. But that is not the only thing wrong with Kyoto. All the fanfare around the deal is reminiscent of Hans Christian Andersen's tale of the Emperor's New Clothes. It's utterly worthless. The cuts in carbon dioxide emissions envisioned under Kyoto have done nothing significant to halt climate change. The European Union claims to be leading the rest of the world on the issue, yet when its governments met during the time of Kyoto's implementation in 2005, they too refused to set any post-2012 targets for emission cuts at all, because they were all making money off the fossil fuel industry. And the car industry was selling us a load of bull. So the catalyst for even greater fanfare was probably the Copenhagen conference in December 2009. What emerged from the debacle was the realization that the global warming the rich world is largely responsible for and will continue to be disproportionately paid for by the poor nations in the globe, in the South. Mm-hmm. The politicians failed to deliver on activists' demands, which include large emissions cuts. Haven't we been asking for this stuff, right? The payment of ecological debt to climate victims, and the decommissioning of carbon markets. Now, I had been involved in looking at what the climate, not the tax, it was the climate fee, and fossil fuel industry would be having to pay based on how much carbon they emitted at the, getting out there, right out into the atmosphere basis at, when we use it. And that hasn't really gone that far. That was Citizens Climate Lobby, and people were equating that with the Republicans and a tax and all this other crap. And it really wasn't a terrible idea. And I do know the people around here that are in that, and they're really still trying very hard. They are. So Kyoto and all those other things, no binding agreement was forthcoming, so it was business as usual, and we all just went on with it because I did. Okay, I had a 4-cylinder Escape for a long time because I thought I was doing the right thing. I didn't buy a Prius. I bought an Escape. The fault for this can be laid fairly and squarely with the rich world, who sidelined the developing world from discussions from the beginning. Thus, the limitations of a non-transparent decision-making process, which granted a disproportionate amount of leverage to the former, principally the U.S., was brought to bear on the conference from the outset. As the Indian environmentalist and activist Sunita Narain put it, the breakdown in negotiations happened because basically, the United States wants to dismantle the Kyoto Protocol. They want to dismantle the Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is based on the notion of equity, and replace it with a completely different multilateral system designed to suit their interests. And we're all such idiots. Okay, maybe I'm being a little emotional. So many of us were not awake. We weren't. We weren't. We were consumers, and we were meat eaters, and we were contributing because we didn't know any better, because our government didn't help us, because even the companies out there that could have helped us didn't, and because the fossil fuel basically industries own us and have everyone by the proverbial balls, and we know it. So this much was apparent to the discerning viewer. In this regard, it was clear the rich were motivated by a very different set of negotiating conditions than the poor world. The template for the former being the implementation of a non-binding arrangement that the poor were urged to sign up to. This explains why, for example, the U.S. was able to put on the table a very small number, 3% cut in emissions below 1990 levels, when it needed to cut 40% or more. The next major conference that promised much but delivered nothing was the Paris Conference in 2015, COP21. Former NASA scientist James Hansen, I've talked about him, I showed the video with his granddaughter the other day, remarked that the discussions were a fraud and a fake. And Guy McPherson says it, and so do a lot of others. He added, it's just bullshit for them to say, oh, we'll have a 2-degree warming target and then try to do a little better every 5 years. It's just worthless words because there's no action, just promises. Meanwhile, the United States used the fact that it hadn't ratified any human rights statute internationally as a poison divide and rule pill against developing countries. The aim was to pick off the most vulnerable as their justification for shifting blame for the crisis onto the smaller nations. Wow, what an article. Kenyan political ecologist Ruth Nyambura summed up the impasse well when she said, we want to get out of this sinking ship, but countries like the U.S. are holding lifeboats. They're holding lifeboats. We're holding the lifeboats. Do you know how much they hate the United States now? And especially with 45? The settlement that emerged in Paris was extremely weak, due largely to negotiated consensual interplay between the most powerful players. This meant they were able to use each other to take things off the table they didn't want. This interplay, to a great extent, was determined by the influence the oil, coal, and gas companies had on the proceedings, as well as the banks, hedge funds, and other financial institutions who fund them. They wrote the Paris Agreement. They did. Okay? The giant corporations garner an enormous amount of power in terms of their ability to be able to influence the decision-making process of the most powerful governments. This often takes the form of lobbying of leading politicians of these governments by the giant corporations. Conflict of interest issues remained a feature in Paris. Did anybody know this? I knew it, but I still didn't want him to pull out because I thought it really looked awful to the rest of the world, and it still does. So the potential for corruption was as strong as ever, aided ostensibly by credible figures who misrepresented consensus research. Those involved in the scandal included climate change professors who Greenpeace exposed as individuals who were willing to produce pro-fossil fuel industry research by concealing the source of their funding. Corruption abounds. The rejection of legitimate climate science research also extended to corporate Main Street journalists like Christopher Booker and James Delingpool, whose roles are little more than conduits for the kinds of power they are supposed to hold to account. The leverage that climate change denying journalists and powerful corporate lobbyists, say Koch brothers, former politicians, and others within the denial industry, and it's a freaking industry, just watch Fox News on any day of the week, are able to exert in order to deceive and mislead the public regarding the science cannot be underestimated. One such figure is journalist Peter Hitchens, who ought to know better. The writer, who has many credible and sensible things to say about the conflict in Syria, apparently bases his authority to deny the reality of climate change on misleading glacier figures published by the Science and Environmentally Policy Project, SEPP, run by a discredited environmental scientist called Dr. Fred Singer. That's Fred Singer. The data has been reproduced by several other groups and has also found its way into the Washington Post. Oh, according to George Monbiot, who I love, who we post on Environmental Coffee House, the figures which were published by these groups were subsequently used by Hitchens, as well as other notable denialists like Melanie Phillips and David Bellamy to support their respective positions. However, the groups have one thing in common. They have all been funded by Exxon. First person I'm going to sue. But this fact has not initiated any retractions. On the contrary, it has resulted in the digging in of heels. The intention is to create confusion and the impression of uncertainty within the scientific community. Oh, Trevor, why not? Wait, I got to put this down. Trevor wants to start an environmental coffee house in British Columbia. You don't even have to start one. You can become a live streamer for us and talk about what happens up there. You can become a part of us. Why not? We're worldwide. As long as you have the internet and we keep net neutrality. So even Exxon, the science is settled, even Exxon's own research conducted decades ago that was until recently covered up confirmed the role of fossil fuels in global warming. Despite this, the damage has arguably already been done. Governments can only ameliorate the worst effects of runaway climate change. This author thinks it's too late to stop it in its tracks. As the consequences of climate change feedback begin to take their toll, we will soon be reaching the tipping point. And this will almost certainly be hastened by U.S. President Donald Trump's decision to withdraw from the Paris Accord. If by 2030 carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere remain as high as they are today, then ecosystems will begin to release the carbon dioxide as opposed to absorbing it. Don't you love when they talk about these things that they need as mitigation measures, like these, figuratively big vacuums of carbon dioxide, CO2. Let's vacuum it out of the atmosphere. Let's not stop doing what's causing it. Let's just vacuum it out. Oh, God. At this point, climate change will not only be out of our hands, but it will accelerate without our help. With our dependency on fossil fuels, it's our fault because I am still driving a fossil fuel vehicle. Continuing to increase year on year, it appears that this scenario will indeed come to pass. The complicit role denialists like Hitchens and Bellamy played in it must never be forgiven. Now this guy, he has a donation paste. I like this. Wow, this was good. I want to go back, though, and say his name again. I loved it. Daniel Margrain. I loved it. Cultureandpolitics.org. Daniel Margrain. Holy shit, what an article. I could not have written that any better. Okay, let's go and over some comments. Joanne says plant trees everywhere. Oh, yeah. When our trees are all taken, all the big ones, the artist came today. He's going to take some. He says we have cherry, and he's going to make a table, and he's going to make some art pieces and some instruments. We're going to plant trees. And, oh, wow, there was a lot of comments I missed. Joanne says, again, wake up to the reality. Our government is a corrupt military-industrial complex. Yeah, who doesn't know that? My God. Let's see. Kim said... oh, yeah, we were talking before, and Marcella was here, and she said, hi, Steve and Sandy. I didn't get a chance to say everybody, hi, because I've been so involved in reading this and, talking about this to you. I'm looking at your comments. I don't want you to get upset if I don't have you up there. I do love to put up the comments. Coral reefs are drying. Permafrost is melting. And underneath that permafrost is bacteria and disease that we don't have, we might not have any cure for. But, I'll tell you what, the oligarchy and the rich people don't give a shit because they want us all to die anyway. They do. That's why they're, Mitch McConnell is pushing so hard. And Paul Ryan, he made a faux pas. Oh, boy. If you can find that little clip of him saying how he wants to, how they want it about the killing off of Americans, I don't remember it verbatim. I heard it today. If I could find it, I'll put it up on Environmental Coffee House. Oh, my God. What a Freudian slip, but it was so real. I'm telling you. And it's not by saying, overpopulation or birth control or let's help other countries. I mean, they want to kill us. That's how I feel. If I don't have the insurance that I have right now, my husband would be dead. It just would. He would. So that is really what I have tonight. I have a lot of articles, but I'll put in some references to some of the things that I have. But this guy, man, blew me away. And Daniel Margrain, if I can find you, I'm going to interview you because that article, I thought it was great. And it's controversial. It's scary. And you know who I feel bad about? Of course, I've got a 28-year-old daughter. My Roger at Environmental Coffee House is 27. Look what we've done. What have we done? But of course, I always say, fight, fight, fight. Right? That we fight. And we never give up. Guy McPherson might say we have till 2025? Others may say longer. That doesn't mean we change our lives and say, oh my God, I'm going to be a fat slob. Do nothing, eat, drink beer. No, it means we get politically involved and we reach one and teach one and we get others politically involved. Like I did that young woman at the hospital who had not a freaking clue. Not a clue. 4 kids at 32, not a clue anything was going on. Never even registered to vote. But she will now. Oh, John used the clip today with Ryan, the one I'm talking about. About the open mic. Oh, good. If you guys go to Uphill Media and watch the show that John did this morning, Wake Up, great. It's a great show. And you can see John put up that clip. Maybe that's where I heard it. Because I was listening for a while, but I got sidetracked by phone calls, husband, brother, chainsaws, people, just a day, cooking, everything I have to do. Which I'm not bitching about it. It's just, it's a lot more without your right hand. My husband was my, everything, right arm, did everything. Now his brother seems to be there and lucky. I'm lucky. So we've been almost an hour and I don't know if anybody has any questions, but I'm going to say it and I am going to find someone that may want to work with me, that may want to do an environmental lawsuit against the fossil fuel industry for abrupt climate change that is happening in my state, my neighborhood, my area, to my Amish neighbors, and to me. It's worth a try if the kids are doing it right. And I don't care if I make a cent. I don't want money. I don't want any money. I just wanted to clean up. So I'm going to say goodnight. I don't know if I can go to sleep. I think it's my night to do the page, and we have articles that we need to put up so that we can continue to educate you. And I was going to interview Kevin Hester this week, but my life is insane. I have to bring my husband all the way back to the hospital, which is an hour and a half for his post appointment. And I'm trying to work on the Uphill Media Climate Show because this is the kind of stuff we are going to talk about. Kat, Judy, me, and Bev. And we are going to talk about, yes, Judy, an attorney that is willing to do a class action suit at no charge because he will get notoriety. Preferably someone in New York that will work with me. But we need a scientist. I need someone that can work with me on tornadoes and why these may have happened. Because I do think it's a link to climate change. I cannot think anything different. I just can't. And if you think you live in somewhere safe like I did, bullshit. We're not. but we're going to keep on fighting. We're going to keep on working. And those kids that are in those camps that are fighting the fossil fuel industry, right on. I say all the kids that can do this should do it. Fight. Fight for their future. Fight against those that are taking their future away. Fight against like the CPV plant in Minisink that Roger's doing. Just do it. We need to have a culture of activists, no matter what abrupt climate change is going to herald in. Sitting back is not going to do anything. Nothing. So you join me, and you have, and share this out. Oh my God, did you see that fly? Oh, jeez, my God. It just went in front of the camera. I'm like clusterfly heaven and some really lame-ass cats lately. So listen, guys, good night. And let's see. Oh, what did our friend say? Judy says, in Florida, you get your license, you get registered to vote, and they give you information. Yeah, New York does that too. And Denise, hi. Oh, I would love to see them sued all the time. Okay. Well, I am not joking. I told my husband. He doesn't think I'm nuts. For once. Maybe it's the medicine he's on. Well, anyway, guys, I love you. Peace. Please share this. And Stan, I'm going to end with what you say. What we will allow is what will continue. Thank you, Stan Lasowski. Thank you so much. I'm going to end with that. Good night, everyone. Please share this. I love it. I love that guy's article, and I love you. So peace. I gotta go work. Good night, everybody.
Hello, Carbon Neutral Conference. I'm here in just north of Boston on this fine summer evening with Margaret Klein Solomon, the director and founder of the Climate Mobilization, our organization, and Anya Grenier, the author of the Blueprint for a Climate Emergency Movement and our head of media. And I am the director of policy and strategy and co-founder.
Ezra Silk.
Ezra Silk is my name, of the Climate Mobilization. And we're going to be discussing one of the biggest climate events of the Trump era, which is the publication of David Wallace-Wells' Uninhabitable Earth cover story in New York Magazine. What was it, last week? Perhaps a week and a half ago, which has had a huge explosive impact on the climate discussion in the United States and has provoked a storm of criticism and pushback against the pushback to the article's apocalyptic portrayal of our future and of climate science. So I first want to ask Margaret, who is a PhD clinical psychologist, what was your overall impression to this piece?
Thanks, Ezra. So the piece I thought was quite good. I mean, engaging to read, very scary, which is entirely appropriate. And yeah, I was very pleased to learn that it was the most read article in the history of New York Magazine, getting more than 2 million views. But I also have some thoughts, as I wrote in an article about the pushback, which was after the publication of The Uninhabitable Earth, several scientists and kind of luminaries in the climate movement had a quite negative reaction, saying this is too frightening, fear doesn't motivate people, and we can't go with this doomish narrative. And as a clinical psychologist, I am deeply, deeply concerned about that mentality in the climate movement. This is certainly not the first time this mentality has come up, but it is a very clear instance of it, in which these climate scientists experts in their field try and kind of set rules for the entire discourse, and particularly rules about governing people's emotions, that it's unacceptable to make people too scared. We have to keep the narrative like enough solutions focused, not so focused on the problem, or not so honest about how scary and horrible the problem is, so that people don't I guess they're afraid of people turning off, freaking out, turning off and withdrawing from the issue, which is certainly something that can happen. However, I feel that telling the truth about the climate crisis, including looking at worst case scenarios, can actually have the much, much, much more important effect of having people turn on to the climate crisis, meaning to I wrote an essay called The Transformative Power of Climate Truth, meaning what is happening is shocking. I mean, it's on a scale, this epic scale. It's it's really kind of a battle of good and evil, or it's certainly death versus life. And that what we want, what we need from people, from the public, is people to take that in, to feel freaked out about it, and to go through a process. You don't just get really scared and just stop. You then say, well, what can I do about this? How can I prevent these horrible scenarios from unfolding that were depicted in the article? So yeah, I think that the climate movement can suffer from affect phobia, fear of emotions, especially fear, but other ones as well, and try to stick with the facts and the science, and just keep everybody calm. And it's not psychologically healthy or indicated. Let's say.
Well, Anya, I want to hear your general thoughts, but I have a basic question, which is, I saw some of the pushback articles were describing the uninhabitable Earth piece as extinction porn or something like that, seemingly implying that the fact that 2 million people had viewed it as the fact that it was a kind of pornography, therefore illegitimate. Do you think that the fact that 2 million people read this is proof that fear does work, in contrast to the notion that fear doesn't work, or is it more complicated? Or perhaps Margaret could answer this if you don't want to.
No, sorry. I think it's a really good question. I don't know what this. I've also.
That was my hope, was to ask a really good question.
I've also wondered about this phrase extinction porn, and in what way is this article pornographic? What are those critics even saying?
They're saying people are taking pleasure in destruction, like watching a zombie movie, and therefore the massive level of engagement is like the fact that half the internet every day is people masturbating to pornography, and what's that doing to change society?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think that whether it's working, I think it's too soon to say. There hasn't been enough time yet to see whether there's going to be an uptick in meaningful climate action as a result of this article. But I will say that I've had people for whom climate is not their primary concern, reach out to me in the last week saying that they want to talk about this article. And I think that just breaking that sort of societal taboo, or sort of putting it into the public discourse in such a prominent way, in the way that Margaret has always sort of spoken about the need for some kind of breakdown of the taboos that we have surrounding what is acceptable to say about climate change. It's promising in and of itself, I guess. No matter what they do, I think that step of opening the floor for what kind of ideas you can have, or what you can talk to people about, by having it impossible to sort of measure out the full effects of that. But I think it's productive. And to the question of it being pornographic, I mean, I think that the criticisms that I've seen, I think the criticisms of porn are often that they give people a really an untruthful idea of the world or untruthful expectations that then kind of corrupt their like day-to-day interactions, you know, like it makes you sort of more likely to want to live out those fantasies by like degrading women or sort of violence porn, like going on some kind of shooting rampage. And I think that it's hard for me to imagine how this article could have a similar negative impact on people, like make them accelerate the crisis more. So I'm not sure I agree with that. But I think that I think the sort of the idea of the climate movement kind of, not the movement, but there being this kind of wisdom about just how fragile people are, this idea that like we can handle certain things, but masses of people can't, is, you know, a problem for many reasons, but I think also a problem because, you know, there is a kind of political order that underwrites that assumption, which, you know, which people are protected from that truth. You know, certainly not the people who are like currently starving or dealing with droughts or you know, flooding, like all of the horrific climate events that we've seen in the last year. Like you said, this was the major climate event since like one of the major climate events since the election. So I think the fact that for people in the United States, for the masses of people in the United States, having to deal with the fear of what could happen in the future is like the worst experience with climate change that you can have. But that's not true globally. Like people aren't being, you know, like most people aren't protected from the reality of climate change. Yeah. They're experiencing the reality of climate change. So I think that it's kind of clearly a very problematic idea.
There's kind of a confusion between the actual impact of the climate crisis and the feelings associated with anticipating the climate crisis. So this idea of don't scare people, it's like protect people from the feelings of being afraid of the climate crisis, when actually we need to be really focused on protecting people from those actual events. I mean, it's
right. Yeah, like I guess sort of the idea that the anticipation of the bad news is bad in itself, whereas, you know, really we should be grateful that we have the ability to make these forecasts, and it's good news that we can look that far into the future and actually try to do something about it. I mean, there have been other mass extinction events that no one had the capacity to see coming and couldn't have prepared for because they were dinosaurs, you know. And
Go ahead, sorry.
Go ahead. No.
The author, Chris Shaw, he wrote a book on the 2 degrees dangerous limit, deconstructing that media narrative and political economy narrative as fundamentally false and delusional. But he interviewed all these climate campaigners and climate NGO people and characterized their fundamental understanding of their relationship to the public, and their role is don't scare the children. And again, as a psychologist, Margaret, I'm one, you know, I've heard you talk about the idea of defense mechanisms being involved in people's perception, climate communicators' perception that we can't scare the children. The children being the masses, the public, etc. Do you think that that's what's going on? Defense mechanisms, or is there are they defending their own psychology, or are they defending the system, or the current order, or what's going on here? You know some of these people.
Yeah, to some degree, all of the above, I think. But I'll draw out a couple of those processes. One is this idea of they can't handle it. Right? They can't handle the truth. They're going to be too scared. They're going to be overwhelmed, right? If someone is saying that, really they're primarily talking about their own experience, right? They're using their own feelings of overwhelm and not being able to handle this reality and projecting that onto the public, right? And so should ever you feel the impulse to shield someone else from this reality, I mean, I think it's kind of important to reflect a bit on how you are doing with handling this, intense and explosive truth. Like one analogy that comes to mind is when parents, how parents talk to their children about death, and often try to shield their children from this frightening, sad experience. Like sometimes parents, when a pet dies, will lie and say he's on a farm or whatever, or will like get a new pet and try to distract the child. And it's really the parent is having difficulty with these feelings. They're saying, oh, we need to protect the child, but really they're protecting themselves. So I think that's part of it. I think protecting the system is absolutely true, because if we actually face the truth of the climate crisis, then clearly we need radical change. And there's many elites and, let's say, philanthropic foundations and who don't want radical change yet.
And
Anna, you can speak to this.
Sure. To end on a kind of note of
We can keep going a little bit. I mean,
okay.
This is
solutions or whatever. Yeah.
Well, we're not even close to being done here.
to follow the wisdom of pairing the apocalyptic prophecies with solutions, I do think that, again to what I was saying before, like I think that, clearly there's a way to present very bad news and make people feel overwhelmed and paralyzed and in denial. I mean, when I think about the way that I think about something like the threat of a global pandemic or like nuclear holocaust or something like that, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about those problems because it is not clear to me how I can have an impact on preventing those things. And I think that but with climate change, we actually have a very good idea of how everyone can begin. It's a very complicated solution, but I think that pairing the truth is so important, because if we can't actually evaluate and look at the whole scope of the truth, then by protecting ourselves emotionally in the moment, we have forfeited the opportunity to do anything adequate. But I think that sort of, trying to present it like it's good that we're looking at this whole problem, because look at all the stuff we can still do. Sort of treating it as there can be a kind of culture of too much certainty around doom as well. Like, we're very bad at predicting the future. We have no idea. We haven't even begun to apply the sort of ingenuity of human civilization that invented everything we have thus far to solving this problem. Like, there's no certainty around it. So I think that just being clear about sort of the opportunity and the challenge that we have ahead of us, but like that we need to have a realistic diagnosis of the problem to go about trying to solve it. Yeah.
I have a question for you. And that's, I think Anya's point is really, really well taken, and I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about the mobilization we need.
Oh, gosh. I want to ask my question.
Okay.
I want to stay on the doom for a second. I think one of the most interesting things is you wrote a piece in response to the uninhabitable Earth on Common Dreams. What was it called? Please remind me.
It's okay to be afraid. The planet, they did the headline.
Yeah.
So it's, the planet is warming. It's okay to be afraid.
Yeah. And you had a line in there about you were very skeptical about the idea of climate scientists being the arbiters of political debates relating to climate and psychological debates. It just raises to me some interesting questions fundamentally about the role these climate scientists, as Michael Mann and Holt House and Jim Hansen are playing, it seems that their role has gone far beyond explaining climate science, and they have taken on almost a movement leadership role. And it seems like this article has provoked a backlash to that to some extent. And what is the appropriate? I mean, should we restrain people to what their PhD is? Should you only be talking about psychology? Should I only be talking about journalism or whatever? Or how does that all play out? In terms of just in terms of the 2-degree target, people say this is science, this is scientific, but it's also evil because we know what the consequences of it are. So how do we navigate this terrain of science and politics?
Yeah, I think any climate scientist is a scientist and also a citizen, and anyone in any other field is in that field and also a citizen. So I think it's appropriate for anyone to talk about politics and the movement, but I think the problem in the climate movement is that climate scientists occupy this place of very elevated credibility on any topic. The media and the movement doesn't really tend to distinguish between is this a person an expert in the field that they're talking about.
Yeah, so they can be saying a gradually rising carbon fee is the answer.
Right,
Everyone's like, this scientist said it's the answer.
Right, exactly. That's James Hansen says that that's his political advocacy, but when he talks about it, he ties it up with the same kind of certainty as the science, and that's a problem.
Yeah. So it is getting a little dark. I want to add at the end my thoughts on the article, but did you have any general thoughts you wanted to add? People might not know what's in the article.
We should tell them a little bit about climate mobilization and like the movement that we're trying to start.
So
have started.
So the climate mobilization has always been based in the idea that the understanding the truth of the climate emergency must be the foundation of any kind of effort to respond successfully to it. And based on that principle, we've been pushing forward the idea of a World War II scale mobilization that goes beyond business as usual to restore a safe climate. Our view is that the Earth is already too hot. It's immoral how much we've already warmed the Earth and destroyed the biosphere, and that we need to roll the whole thing back as quickly as possible. And we've had a variety of projects, including trying to influence the 2016 elections with Bernie Sanders, and we had some success with that and the Democratic Party platform. And we're now working in Los Angeles. Along with a coalition of community climate justice leaders, Naomi Klein and Councilmember Paul Koretz, we've announced an initiative to become carbon neutral by 2025 in the city of Los Angeles and start drawing down greenhouse gases through a World War II scale mobilization. So we're hoping that can catalyze a humongous mobilization across the world as rapidly as possible, based on our understanding of the truth of the climate crisis.
That basically our advocacy is, like the uninhabitable Earth article says, look, this problem could destroy humanity and all the other species on this planet, and we take that very seriously. So our advocacy is, well, we should do everything that we can to prevent it. Not just market-based solutions, not just solutions that don't, bother anybody, but actually do what is necessary, including, massive investment, retiring fossil fuels as quickly as possible in 10 years or less, transforming our agricultural system, et cetera, Ezra wrote a great victory plan about this, and Anya wrote a great blueprint for a climate emergency movement about how a social movement could make this possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the best, the sort of way I think of it is right now, we have all of these brilliant people in the world and society, and a very tiny portion of them are focused on solving the climate crisis, which is arguably the biggest problem that we're facing sort of as a whole planet. And I think our our ethos has been like, well, we, not ask what is possible, given the fact that it's this marginal issue that is being attacked only with these like half-hearted, incremental solutions. But like, let's just all be honest with each other about the fact that this is the biggest issue facing with us, and initiate like a mode switch in which suddenly all of that energy, which is being directed towards like figuring out how to engineer oil extracting and build apps, iPhones, towards solving the biggest problem we've ever faced, and will be this generation that saves the possibility of life for all the humans that come after, if we're successful. So just the idea that we don't, focusing human potential.
Imagine if the dinosaurs could have known that there was an asteroid coming and made plans about how to deal with this, how to take it out.
And create an even better dinosaur world for themselves as they stop the asteroid.
And then there was a group of dinosaurs that were like, no, don't talk about the asteroid. It's too scary. Right? Like, no, you gotta talk about the asteroid.
Yeah.
Only talk about... never mind. So I just want to thank David Wallace-Wells, in case he's watching this, for writing that piece. I read it for the first time this morning, and I did genuinely start crying after I read it, because I was reminded of why I was doing all this in the first place, which is how fucking horrible and evil letting climate change go unchallenged really is, and that it is an evil beyond the scale of the Holocaust. And I thought he just conveyed that brilliantly. And it's really a shame that some people in the climate community jumped on this so quickly to shut it down, when it's opened up so much potential and opportunity in the broader society to get this mobilization going soon.
So just, I think to close, I want to just emphasize a point that you're making, which is climate change is not primarily a scientific issue, though that helps us understand what's physically unfolding, but it is a moral issue. These are moral choices, and we view it as immoral evil to allow this climate crisis to unfold, and for the current millions of people who are suffering from famine in Africa to become billions of people around the world, and civilization to collapse. These are moral choices, and we hope that everyone joins us in fighting for justice and our species and every other species.
And that you can still see us.
Yeah.
So if I'm a dinosaur who doesn't want to turn into fossil fuel, where do I find out more about this, and where do I find out about this LA project?
theclimatemobilization.org
and mobilize.la.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Follow us on YouTube, gotcm.org/